What is up, everybody? Welcome back. Originally, this was going to be a traditional film room episode, but there was such a huge outpouring of requests for fantasy football rankings that, originally I was going to do these in a couple weeks, but since a lot of you have your drafts this weekend, I shifted my schedule up, and I'm going to do this episode, I guess you can call it a podcast, a week or two early, and just kind of get my rankings out there for you guys to use for your drafts this weekend. Obviously, a lot of this stuff can change after preseason week 3 if there's injuries or any other major type of news like that. So these will be updated accordingly after if it's necessary. If you are a Patreon supporter for this channel, you can find these in PDF format. It doesn't matter how much you gave. It's going to be $10, $20, $1. It does not matter. Every single Patreon supporter will have access to these in PDF format. And after preseason week 3, if there's any major updates that need to be made, I will post new PDFs and you can download the new PDFs. So, without further ado, these are my final complete fantasy football rankings for this season in redraft leagues, PPR leagues, I should say. I only play PPR, so these are all my PPR rankings. And everything is done by film study with some analytics taken into account, some coaching decisions taken into account, but predominantly it's based on my own personal film study, so these rankings are going to be a little bit different than you might see elsewhere. I'm a lot higher on some players than other people. I'm a lot lower on some players than other people, so don't expect this to strictly follow the consensus. It's just based on my personal feelings and my personal film study. Now, a few months ago, if you watched my how to draft properly video, it was kind of the last podcast type episode that I did. I broke down how I format my rankings, how I only do it by position, and I don't do a complete big board, because I feel like if you do a complete big board with all positions together, it kind of skews their relative value. And what I mean by that is not all positions are created equally on a round-to-round basis. So if you're looking at running backs, for example, the way I have it laid out, you can see that round 1, there's a lot of talent. And then round 2 and 3, there's some good high upside talent, but it really thins out. And then it kind of falls off a cliff. And you're stuck with a lot of high upside rookies. You're stuck with role players, handcuffs, all that kind of stuff, until you get to round 12 and 13, where it's just chock full of more handcuffs and flyers and high upside guys that you want to stash on your bench. So you can't put all these guys into one list with your receivers and your tight ends, because it will kind of mask where the value is relative to the rounds that these guys are valued at. If they're all together, you won't really be able to discern, that round 4 and 5 is super thin, whereas round 6 through 8 there's a little bit more value. So keeping it all isolated by position, you can get a sense of where you should be looking at certain positions based on how thin the rankings are at that round. Looking at wide receiver, to contrast that, rounds 1 through 4 are absolutely loaded. Tons of talent. So much talent that you really don't even need to take a wide receiver round 1, because they're going to be there in round 2 and 3. There's too much talent for them not to fall down a little bit. So that's why, personally, I'm probably going to be targeting running back early, because I know I'm still going to get receivers all the way through round 4. There's just too many of them for me to not get a couple of them. And then the downturn for receiver happens where there's a little bit of an uptick for running back. So, rounds 6 through 8, there's a lot of role players, there's some high upside guys, but it's definitely in stark contrast to the first 4 rounds. And then it kind of picks up again in the later rounds, where you've got all the other high upside flyers that you want on your bench. So knowing where positions are strong and where positions are weak can help you draft a more well-balanced team, and you're not stuck scrambling trying to fill out depth and hitting the waiver wire over and over again because you didn't draft properly. So again, identify where certain positions are strong and where they're weak, and it will help you on draft day. Let's take a quick look at quarterback. Same kind of thing. It's thin all the way through until about rounds 8 through 11, I would say, is the prime area where you can still get a starter. You can get a high upside QB2 if you already took a guy. If you're getting real risky, maybe you want to wait till round 12 and go after Jay Cutler and then get a high upside backup in late in the draft, whether it's Deshaun Kaiser or Jared Goff, whatever. It depends on how risky you want to be and where you're finding other values at other positions. But I'm a big believer in taking quarterbacks later in the draft, so I will probably not take Aaron Rodgers at all this year. I probably won't take Tom Brady. I'm going to wait for that round 8 to 11 strike zone, and I'm going to pick up an Andrew Luck. I'm going to pick up Dak Prescott or Matthew Stafford or somebody like that who can give me maybe not elite numbers and maybe not play every week, but I'll be able to survive. And if I can fill out my roster in the earlier rounds where the Aaron Rodgers are going, if I can get a good receiver, get a good running back, and kind of offset that, then I'm okay with it. That's typically the strategy I played, and it served me well for a very long time. Flip it over to tight end for a quick look. Again, it's very thin early. You've got your elite guys, the Gronkowski, the Kelsey, the Olsen. They all have their different problems. Gronkowski being health, Kelsey being quarterback, Olsen just probably. Actually, I don't really see any downsides with Olsen. He's kind of that really good high floor elite tight end that you look for. But after that round 3, 4, 5 trio, you get a little pop in the 6th and 7th round with Jordan Reed, Jimmy Graham, Tyler Eifert, and Kyle Rudolph. So that's kind of the prime spot for me to hit tight end. And if you miss that window, you can always get one in rounds 9 through 11 where you kind of have the tier 2 to tier 3 starting tight ends. And then, of course, round 12 and 13, just like with running back, is just full of high upside flyers or just guys that you can survive with if you're filling out your other positions with higher end talent earlier in the draft. So, again, I'm going to hit this point over and over again. Knowing where positions are strong and where they're weak will help you kind of to formulate a plan of how you're going to approach the draft. And if a certain position starts going early, in the back of your mind, when you're looking at these rankings, you'll see where it's strong again and how you can plan out who you're going to be taking down the draft. I'm a very reactionary drafter, so I don't go into it expecting to take one player or another, but I do expect to hit one position or another based on the depth at those positions. And kind of balancing that reactionary drafting with predictive drafting, because you know where the depth is, it's hard to get a hold of it first, but once you do, you can get some incredibly strong teams. I win a lot of leagues drafting this way, and I don't really have to hit the waiver wire a lot because I draft so strongly, because I know where I can hit the depth and where I can kind of avoid these bad runs that people go on out of desperation. So anyway, let's go back to running back. Let's look at it a little bit closer in terms of why I have certain guys in certain spots. David Johnson's obviously the number 1, and Le'Veon Bell's obviously the number 2. I don't really need to explain much on those guys. They're going to get a ton of touches. They're going to get a ton of yards. Both of them will probably approach 2,000 scrimmage yards around in that area, as long as they're healthy, obviously. They can very easily get 100 to 120 yards at any given game, whether it's rushing, receiving. It does not matter. They're exceptionally talented. They're the focal points of their offenses. I have no problem taking either one of them at 1 or 2. Now, the third running back spot, I've got Jay Ajayi. Most people have LaShawn McCoy. The reason why I put Ajayi over McCoy is A, Mike Pouncey is healthy again. He's going to be playing in the preseason, and presumably he'll be healthy in the regular season. And like I said in my video breakdown of him about a month ago, I want to say, as long as Mike Pouncey is healthy, Jay Ajayi will be incredibly productive. Ryan Tannehill went down, but he's got Jay Cutler back there, who I consider kind of an even trade in terms of quarterback talent. So, he's not going to be carrying the offense himself. He's got a quarterback that can sling it. He's got receiving talent outside of him with Devontae Parker and Jarvis Landry. He's got a decent offensive line in front of him, especially now that Pouncey's back. So I feel really confident that as long as he's healthy and as long as Pouncey is healthy, of course, he can put up that kind of total 1,500 to 1,600 yards this season, probably double-digit touchdowns, which if you're trying to do RB 3, 4, or 5 in that top 5 running back range, that's pretty much what you want. You want that 1,500 to 1,600 yards. You want the double-digit touchdowns. You want the consistency from week to week. I think Ajayi is going to give you that. McCoy, I put just under him because even though he's on a much worse team than Miami, or at least I feel they're going to be worse, he's pretty much all they got. He's going to be the focal point of the offense. He's going to get carries. He's going to get catches. He's going to get a ton of production. Their line isn't bad. I don't consider it great, but it's not bad. It's good enough for him to get holes against the heavy boxes he's going to see, and I think he's going to be very productive because again, he's really the only guy that they can give the ball to and take over a game. Nobody's going to be afraid of Jordan Matthews. Nobody's going to be afraid of Zay Jones or Charles Clay. It's pretty much LaShawn McCoy or nothing. So he's going to get the ball a ton, and usually in fantasy football, volume translates to production, and production translates to points. So if you're taking him in the first round, even though I don't think the Bills are going to be a good team, I'm okay with that. Jordan Howard and Devontae Freeman round out my round one running backs. Jordan Howard, I broke down a little while ago as well. He's still got that elite interior offensive line with Cody Whitehair and Josh Sitton and Kyle Long, presuming they're all going to be healthy. Kyle Long's coming off a couple injuries, but again, if they're healthy, I think that's an elite interior offensive line. He's got a better quarterback situation this year because I'm a believer in Mitch Trubisky. Cameron Meredith, I think, is a good wide receiver one to take attention away from him. They're in a very zone-heavy scheme, which he's a zone running back, and he's going to get carries. He's still the backbone of this offense. So even though he's not the most physically gifted running back in this group, in fact, he's probably the least physically gifted among the first-round running backs. Actually, he's probably the least physically gifted among all of the top 3 or 4 rounds of running backs, but he's going to get the workload. He's in a system that fits his skill set. He's got a better quarterback situation. He's got a wide receiver that can take attention away from him. And he put up production last year in a worse situation than he's got now. So I'm a big believer in him. I think he's a very safe late round one consideration, especially if you just want to get your running back and just kind of solidify that spot because it falls off a cliff so early. And, you could do a lot worse than him as a first-round pick. Devontae Freeman's right behind him. He doesn't quite have the ceiling of all these other first-round running backs because he's got Tevin Coleman taking a bunch of touches, but his floor is extremely high. He's going to be their red zone weapon. He's going to be their goal line option at running back. I think in a very productive offense that's going to get down to the goal line frequently, having a goal line back in that offense is valuable because every single week he's got potential to get multiple touchdowns. Every single week. He catches the ball well. He runs it inside. He runs it outside. He's a very versatile, just solid running back talent in a very good offense. And it's hard to find those. It's very hard to find those in the NFL, especially in fantasy football. So just take the points. Just take the points. He's not going to wow you and put up huge numbers every week, but he's going to give you points consistently, which is valuable enough to me to put him in round one. Round two is tricky as well because there's a lot of high upside guys. There's big names kind of sprinkled in with breakout candidates. Poster child, of course, being Leonard Fournette, who I think is the most talented running back to come out of college in several years, and that includes Ezekiel Elliott and Todd Gurley, who are in this draft range as well. And he's on a bad team. He's on the Jaguars, but he's not on a bad roster. I know that doesn't make sense, but his offensive line isn't that bad, and his receiving core I consider it actually to be pretty good. His defense is good. The only thing that's explicitly bad around him is the quarterback. Whether or not Blake Bortles is even starting week one, I have no idea, nor do I care, because regardless of whether or not it's Bortles or Henne, the offense is still going to be running through Leonard Fournette. It does not matter who's throwing the ball. It only matters who's running it, and Fournette is easily, and it's not even close, he is easily the most talented and best running back on that team. They're going to pound it with him 20-plus times a game as long as he's healthy because he is their only legitimate offensive threat on the ground. Everything is going to be funneled through him, which is why I have him as a round 2 pick despite being on a very bad ball club, because he is so talented and we know he's going to get the ball so much that you can't not take him in the top 2 rounds. Similar kind of thing to Todd Gurley. Everything is going to be running through Todd Gurley on the ground because they're still trying to develop Jared Goff. The more successful the run game, the more successful Todd Gurley is, the more successful Goff can be because not everything is going to be all on his shoulders. I think Goff is the kind of quarterback that thrives on touch and timing and just kind of keeping the offense on schedule. And as long as his running game is successful and Todd Gurley is successful, he can do that just fine, especially because he's got such a wildly different receiving core than he did last year. He's got Sammy Watkins now. He's got Robert Woods now. He's got Cooper Kupp, who's showing up to be a surprisingly very good rookie receiver in the preseason. They've got a couple tight ends that I really like in Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett. I mean, the dude's got weapons around him that he can distribute the ball evenly and he can keep those chains moving. But it's still going to rely on Todd Gurley to keep everything on schedule. The more 3rd and 2s they get instead of 3rd and 7s, the better. Oh, and of course, I got to mention while I'm still talking about both Gurley and Goff, their offensive line, at least on paper, is way better than it was last year. So I'm kind of riding this Rams offense a little bit. I think as a group, just with how much talent they have now, with the improved offensive line, with a more confident quarterback, and Gurley looking as spry as ever, I'm kind of riding them a little bit. I expect a lot of big things from them. So if you did take a receiver in round 1 and you're kind of looking to fill out running back in round 2, I'm okay with taking Gurley there because I just believe in the offense he's in. I believe in his coach. I believe in the receivers. I believe a little bit more in the line. I'm digging it. I'm really digging it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Lamar Miller, who I thought was a first-round pick last year, and there was injuries on the line. The quarterback situation was terrible. The receivers were, other than DeAndre Hopkins, not very good, and his production just completely fell off a cliff. It was bad. So I slid him down to round 3 for this year because, while the line should be improved now that Nick Martin is back and Dwayne Brown is healthy, he's not reported to camp yet, but he's healthy. With the line being better, with the quarterback situation being better, there's still just so many unknowns in this Houston offense that I don't feel comfortable making Miller my RB1. So I put him in round 3 with all the other high upside RB2s. And I'm a Texans fan, so I sincerely hope that he's going to be better this year than he was last year. But it's hard for me to stomach him as a 1st or 2nd round pick because there's so much unknown. I'm more confident in the unknown in LA with the Rams and Todd Gurley than I am with the unknown in Houston with Lamar Miller. All of the unknowns in Houston are negative. All the unknowns in LA are positive. So even though they're kind of grouped in that same tier, that round 2 to round 3 tier, they're very much far apart in terms of how I value them. DeMarco Murray and Melvin Gordon, just quick hits on them. I think DeMarco Murray is another high upside guy, but he's got Derrick Henry breathing down his neck. So you could look at him as an RB1 for your team because it's obviously a run-heavy offense. He's going to get a ton of carries. But you kind of can't take him without also taking Derrick Henry. And I've got Henry slotted around 9 or 10 because I think if DeMarco Murray goes down, Henry's going to get a ton of carries. He's going to be an instant RB1. And DeMarco Murray, throughout his career, hasn't exactly been the healthiest running back. So you have to handcuff him if you take him. You cannot take him without also having a plan to take Derrick Henry, or else, to me, you're playing with fire. You really are. And if you feel like your league mates are going to be gunning for Henry early after you take Murray, you got to beat him to it. Because if you don't, if DeMarco Murray goes down, and like I said, he's gone down quite a bit in his career, but if he goes down and Derrick Henry is slid into somebody else's lineup as an instant RB1 that's getting 15 to 20 points a game, you will hate yourself. You will absolutely hate yourself. So if you're investing in this Titans run game, this run game that we know they're going to run it all the time. They want to run it 25 to 30 times a game. If you're investing in that run game, you have to do it all the way. You can't half-ass it. If you're taking Murray, you have to take Henry. It's very similar to how you used to take Arian Foster and then you had to take Ben Tate. Like, you absolutely had to back in the day. When Arian Foster was great and Ben Tate was also great, you had to take both of them because if Arian Foster went down, and he was injury prone, so he went down quite a bit, Ben Tate was easily a 15 to 20 point kind of back. So very similar situation. Just be aware of it. And if you're willing to make that investment into Murray, you have to be willing to make it into Henry as well. Now, Melvin Gordon, I was big on him before that Forrest Lamp injury. I'm still big on him, but not quite as big because the Chargers' offensive line has just never been able to stay healthy, and even Gordon himself has had some health issues. So if he can show me that he can stay healthy, if the line can stay healthy, he's going to put up a lot of points, but oh man, it's risky. It's risky. And that Lamp injury was just a wake-up call for me that you never know when it's going to happen, but you're pretty sure it's going to happen. Somebody on that line is going to get injured. It's going to be somebody crucial and important, and it's going to negatively affect their run game. Their run game has been kind of trashed by injuries the last few years because their line can't stay healthy. It's never been able to stay healthy, and it's unfortunate, but as much as I love Gordon as a player, I love him as a person, I love him as a talent, I can't trust that team as a whole to not disappoint me. So you can take him in round 2, but by God, be prepared for disappointment. It's very high upside, very high risk. Just be aware of that. Ezekiel Elliott, speaking of high upside, high risk, I had him as my first overall player for a very long time, and then the suspension happened. So if he's missing 6 games plus a bye week, so maximum he's playing, 7, 8 games, something like that. You can't take a guy who's guaranteed only going to be playing 7 or 8 games for you, including the playoffs. You can't take him in the first round. You'll love the production when you get it, but that's too much time missed for me to invest that high in somebody. So I'm treating it like he's coming off of an injury. I'm treating it like he's my mid-season ace in the hole. For me, an early 3rd round pick, that's appropriate. You just have to survive the first couple weeks without him, or not couple. You have to survive the first 7 weeks without him, and then you can get a good 20-plus point back for the back half of the season. But the key, if you are planning on taking Elliott, and Godspeed if you are, you have to invest elsewhere. You have to. You can't have the first 7 weeks, you're rolling out LeGarrette Blount and Rob Kelly. Okay? Because if you start out 1-6, you're not making the playoffs anyway. Okay? You won't even get to use Elliott in the playoffs, which is where a lot of his value comes from, is the fact that people are saying, like, okay, he's going to miss the first 2 weeks, but at least I'll have him for the postseason. That doesn't matter if you don't make the postseason. So you have to invest early in running back, and then just consider Elliott to be your gravy on top. Okay? Think of him like a flex player. Don't think of him as your RB1, because he's not. He is not your RB1. He's going to be drafted like an RB1, but he's not. Okay? Just don't dig yourself into that hole, because you will not get out of it. I promise you, you will not get out of it. Okay? Just be cautious. Now, moving on from that, the back of round 3 into round 4, it's where I'm starting to kind of sprinkle in more rookies. You got Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey, both very high upside players, extremely valuable in PPR because they can catch the football, and they're going to be in systems where they want to throw the football. The Panthers made it very clear they want to throw the football to running backs a lot this season, which is why they drafted McCaffrey. Dalvin Cook is obviously going to catch a ton of balls because Sam Bradford likes throwing to his running backs. I think you could make the case for either one of them being your RB2, and I'm okay with it. I'm absolutely okay with it, even though there are questions about them, especially Dalvin Cook with the offensive line he's got. But when you look at the volume, you look at the talent, you look at the role, I think it's very, very easy for me to slide them in as my RB2 and feel great about it. Doug Martin, similar kind of thing to Ezekiel Elliott. If you're investing in him, you have to invest in Jacquizz Rodgers. You can't look at him as your RB1. Even though he's an RB1 kind of guy when he's on the field, you can't look at him as your RB1 because he's missing the first 2 games. All right, if you fall behind in the standings, it's not as bad as Elliott, obviously, but if you fall behind in the standings because you're waiting for Martin to come back, it's not a hole you're going to get out of. So if you're taking Martin, take Rodgers, just use him to get points, ride it out the first few weeks, and then slide Martin in when he returns. And then under those circumstances, I think he's worth a 5th round pick. If you're not planning on investing in anything to cover for you while he's out, don't take him in the 5th round. Just don't. If you're taking him that early, you have to have a plan. So don't dig yourself into that hole. Round 6, 7, and 8, that's where you start to see all the role players come out. Marshawn Lynch, he's going to be their goal line back, get a bunch of touchdowns. I don't think he's going to get a ton of yards, but he'll definitely get touchdowns. Joe Mixon, I think, is eventually going to take over the starting spot in Cincinnati, probably in the second half of the season. So again, if you're taking him, invest in someone else because he's not going to be the starter early. C.J. Anderson will be the starter early, but he's in a very crowded backfield full of talented young players, whether it's Devontae Booker or D'Angelo Henderson. So, he might not be the starter in the end of the season, whereas Joe Mixon will be the starter in the end of the season. So, it might even be worth it to pair those two together so you get the early season C.J. Anderson and the late season Joe Mixon. Just food for thought. Tevin Kollmann, again, solid flex option. He'll get catches, he'll get some touchdowns, but mostly he'll be that 10 to 12 point kind of guy, which you look for to anchor that flex spot on a week to week basis. Adrian Peterson, goal line back, he'll get touchdowns, makes him worthy of a flex, which is weird saying that about Adrian Peterson of all people, but I think that's the role they have for him, is to be their goal line and short yardage back and have Mark Ingram do all the receiving and all that kind of stuff. So it's, again, Adrian Peterson is a role player at this point in his career, but he's a good enough role player to be a flex. Jonathan Stewart, same thing, goal line touchdowns, he'll be a flex. Danny Woodhead, always valuable in a PPR as a flex. Duke Johnson, same kind of thing with his receptions. LeGarrette Blount, goal line back. Thomas Rawls, goal line back. Theo Riddick, receptions. Rob Kelly, starter on a team that can't run block for crap, but he's the starter and he'll get the workload. Derrick Henry, I talked about him before. Terrence West, again, starter on a crap offensive line, but he'll get the workload. Frank Gore, starter on a crap offensive line, but he'll get the workload. And he's got some younger backs breathing down his neck. So I probably won't have too much of Frank Gore this season just because he's on a bad offense. At least without Andrew Luck, it's a bad offense with a banged up offensive line, and he's got young competition. Round 10 is like the absolute earliest I would take him. Kareem Hunt, another rookie, high upside, kind of coming for Spencer Ware's job, but at least I know Spencer Ware will always be the goal line back because Kareem Hunt doesn't have a lot of power. So if anything, you could look at it as a committee, but Spencer Ware has higher value because he has more touchdown potential, whereas Kareem Hunt in a PPR, I think, is at least still worthy of a round 10 pick because he's probably going to catch the ball quite a bit. James White, again, he's going to catch the ball a lot. Darren McFadden, if you're taking Ezekiel Elliott, this is one of the guys that I would consider investing in to get you through those first 7 weeks or first 6 games, whatever it is. Because if you take Ezekiel Elliott and then don't take McFadden and you're not getting anything out of that Cowboys run game, it's your own fault. Paul Perkins, I don't really believe in him as a starter, which is why I have Shane Vereen 1 round later. To be honest, I probably won't invest much in the Giants' run game at all, but at least you know Perkins will get the workload. He'll get the short yardage. He'll get the early down stuff, the goal line stuff. So it's worth something, but not much. And that brings us to round 12 and 13 plus. It's just full of flyers and high upside rookies and handcuffs and all that kind of stuff. Usually I just handle these rounds by being aware of who is on my roster and how I need to play these last few rounds around that. So if I need a handcuff, I'll go get a handcuff. If I don't really believe in my flex options, I'll look at high upside rookies. Just know who's already on your team so you can structure your final few picks around that. Don't just purely go off of these rankings. Assess the situation in your roster and react accordingly. Now, wide receiver, same kind of thing. Brown, Jones, Beckham, Evans, Green, to an extent, Hopkins. You're looking at first round picks that are all worth the pick. Most people probably aren't going to go after Hopkins early. I would, because his quarterback situation is much improved. The offensive line's improved. The defense is even better than it already was because Watt's back. I think he's yet again going to be the focal point of the offense. I think him and Tom Savage have a much better chemistry than he ever did with Brock Osweiler. And I think that's going to bump him back up into first round receiver status. He's not going to be drafted like it, but it's how I value him. And you can call me a homer all you want, but I watch the Texans every single week. I know what DeAndre Hopkins is capable of. I know that it was just one down year because Brock Osweiler was just that bad. And I think he's going to bounce back in a big way. So if he's there in the second round, which he probably will be because everybody's way undervaluing him, but if he's there in the second round, I'm going to take him because it's an easy pick for me. He's a first round wide receiver that I'm going to get in the second round. It's hard to outdo that value. Now, as for my second round ranked players, you got Cooks, number 1 wide receiver for Tom Brady. It's statistically every year that spot, the number 1 wide receiver in the Patriots offense, produces a lot of yards. It could be Brandon LaFell one year for all I care. Brandon LaFell put up yardage with Tom Brady because he was their number 1. Chris Hogan put up yardage with Tom Brady because he was their deep threat. If you're the deep threat in that New England offense, the de facto number 1 guy, you're going to put up points. And Brandon Cooks is the most talented deep threat they've had on that team in probably since Randy Moss. So I'm not saying he's going to put up Randy Moss numbers, but he's going to put up a lot of numbers. So very easy top of the round 2 pick for me. You could argue him in round 1 even, and I wouldn't really debate it. Amari Cooper, yeah, not enough said. He's fantastic. Des Bryant, Michael Thomas, Terrell Pryor, Allen Robinson. I mean, all of these guys, it's the cases have been made for them. They're very solid round 2 receivers. Pryor probably has the highest upside out of anybody not named Brandon Cooks. I went over that a few weeks ago when I did my film room episode on him, and I still believe this. I think he's a legitimate wide receiver 1, and if you're getting him 3 rounds into the draft, I mean, God, that's spectacular value. He's going to put up huge numbers. He's going to get a bunch of touchdowns, a bunch of catches, and he's finally got a quarterback that can actually throw the ball to him and put it in the right spot where he can be successful with that big frame. For whatever reason, the Browns could not throw back shoulder fades last year, which is what he specializes in, and Kirk Cousins can. He can throw that back shoulder ball. So they're going to throw that early and often. He's going to catch a lot of them. He's going to get a bunch of touchdowns. I'm super excited to see what he does this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he's my wide receiver 1 on 80% of my teams because of that. Moving into the mid rounds, you've got your high catch and in some cases high upside guys. Golden Tate, probably a 90+ catch guy. Doug Baldwin, probably a 90+ catch guy. T.Y. Hilton would be much higher if Andrew Luck was healthy, but I bumped him down because Andrew Luck is not healthy. Sammy Watkins, again, would be much higher if he were healthy, but you can never really guarantee that he's going to be healthy. So, you got the risky high upside guys like Hilton and Watkins. You've got the high floor guys like Tate and Baldwin and Stephon Diggs. You've got Devontae Adams there as your high upside guy. Michael Crabtree is your high floor dependable. Tyreek Hill is your extremely high upside player, both rushing and receiving. Kelvin Benjamin's kind of making a comeback this year. He's looked great in preseason. He's kind of looking to seize that wide receiver 1 status again that he used to have. And I'm okay with him being my wide receiver 2 all day long because he's going to get a bunch of touchdowns. Larry Fitzgerald, the ageless wonder, going to get a bunch of catches from the slot. Crowder and Landry, also a bunch of catches from the slot. Round 6, I'm kind of looking at touchdown threats with Deshaun Jackson and Willie Snead. Snead's their slot receiver, but he does do really good work on the deep ball as well, so you can expect some long touchdowns from him. Dante Moncrief, great red zone threat for Indianapolis. Whenever Andrew Luck comes back, he's going to be an excellent play from week to week. Corey Coleman, kind of the de facto number 1 in Cleveland. I really like what I see from Deshaun Kaiser, so I think he's going to have a pretty big year in his sophomore season. Martavis Bryant, everybody know what he can do when he's on the field, and now he is back on the field, so you could expect some huge, spectacular plays from him, probably a bunch of touchdowns. Cameron Meredith, de facto number 1 in Chicago. He'll get the ball a lot. Garcon, de facto number 1 in San Francisco. He'll get the ball a lot, even though the offense itself is going to be terrible. Garcon's going to get a bunch of catches. Eric Decker, big red zone threat for Marcus Mariota, who is perfection in the red zone. He's still never thrown a pick in the red zone. It's amazing. When the Titans get inside the 20s, Decker's going to get looks a lot. Tyrell Williams, he's going to be your Keenan Allen insurance like he has been the last couple of years. Jordan Matthews, the de facto number 1 in Buffalo. Again, I don't think he's going to have a great season, but he'll get volume, which, it's worth something as a wide receiver 3. Let's see who else we got here. Round 10 and 11, we've got, again, kind of a mix between your deep threats that can score a touchdown at any given moment, like Kenny Stills and Tyler Lockett. You've got your catch magnets like Sterling Shepard and Jerron Brown. It's kind of an even mix depending on what you're looking for, whether you're in PPR or non-PPR. Round 12 and 13, similar thing to running back. A lot of rookies, a lot of high upside players, a lot of handcuffs. If you think Zay Jones is going to be eventually the number 1 in Buffalo, go ahead and take him. If you think Sammy Watkins can't stay healthy and Cooper Kupp is going to take over kind of his role whenever he inevitably gets hurt, again, go for it. This area of the draft is all about taking shots. Just make sure you're doing it and taking your shots logically. That's all I can really ask. If you're just taking flyers on a guy just because, you're doing it wrong. You got to at least have a reason for taking somebody, and usually the roster you already have at this point in the draft is going to determine which shots you're taking and why. So don't just throw darts at a board, okay? You got to have some logic behind your process. All right, that'll do it. These are all my rankings as of now. Hopefully it kind of gave you some new perspectives on some of these players, some insight into why I ranked them how I did, some strategy for how to approach drafting some of the more controversial players, some of the players that require different levels of investment. It's a system I believe in. It's a draft philosophy that I believe in. It served me well for many years, and hopefully it serves you well too. So I'm glad I could share it with you. Glad I could share my thoughts with you, and let's go win some championships. Yeah. Now, if you want these rankings in PDF format today, and if you want the updated rankings next week, any Patreon supporter, past, present, and future, will have access to those for free. Doesn't matter if you gave $20 or $10 or $1. Every single person who has signed up to support this channel via Patreon will get these rankings for free, as well as the updated ones right after week 3 of the preseason. So, it's kind of my gift to you guys for supporting me, and hopefully I can help you win a championship. So, again, doesn't matter what you gave, everybody gets access. Thank you very much for everybody who is already a Patreon supporter. Welcome to the club for everybody who is about to be a Patreon supporter. And, good luck in your fantasy leagues this year. Hopefully you do better than I do, because I take more joy in helping other people win their leagues than I win mine. I know that's kind of weird, but I don't know. It's always just been that way for me. So, again, good luck. Thank you for all the support, and I will see you next week.